Sophie Hardy and the Battle of the Myriad by M.R. Dale. Narrated by Leona Hall. Chapter 16. A Brief History. What the girls stepped into was the tallest room Sophie had ever set foot in. She looked up and couldn't see the ceiling, it went so high. All around her was grey stone. The walls were made of it, the floors were made of it, and nothing else could be seen. Echidna, meanwhile, continued walking forwards. Everyone else followed. "How did you make such a place?" Sophie waded in with the first question. "We have lived here since one of your kind believed he had dampened our powers," Echidna replied. "Alton King?" Clara asked, not taking the subtle approach that Sophie was trying to maintain. "You know him?" Echidna asked, still snaking along the stone floor. "You could say that," Yasmin answered, as the group continued to walk towards an invisible end to the room. "It was he who forced us to banish ourselves here. In the seconds before the pulse became fully active, a number of us combined any magical power we possessed in order to build a safe haven for any individual who required our support. We combined our skills and abilities, and we built this place," Echidna explained. Sophie looked behind her. The enormous door that they had just walked through was getting further into the distance, and still she had no idea where they were heading. "Over the years, we have expanded both in size and members. Many have found us, and we have found many and brought them here. We have missed so many, though. Creatures like us forced to live out in the human world with nothing to help them fend for themselves," Echidna explained, and the girls remained fascinated. Again, as with the Faun and Desmeralda, though, the girls were hearing stories that it wasn't the mythicals that were villainous, but humans. It was like with Desmeralda herself all over again, and because of that, Sophie particularly found it hard to not believe what Echidna was telling them. It was, when all was said and done, the same story again. They couldn't all be lying. "We found Kingsley, brought him here, and have helped him train to master his power. He hasn't done so quite yet, but he is much more able than he was," Echidna added. Then she pointed behind the girls where Kingsley had dropped back slightly. "The things that boy could be capable of are frighteningly exciting." "He could reach the underworld if he so wished," Lichen said with a growl, and it didn't go unnoticed by Sophie. Summoning up 2 balls of blue energy like the girls had seen him do before, Kingsley aimed them both downwards and used the upthrust they were causing to lift him up off the ground and float in midair. Sophie had seen Desmeralda do something similar before the aging and the vanishing, but now Kingsley was doing it and presenting no threat to any of them. There was a look of huge joy and satisfaction on Kingsley's face as he did it. "Impressive," Clara said. Kingsley lowered himself to the floor and continued to smile a broad grin at the girls. He was clearly very pleased with himself, and rightly so. "But how does this place work?" Clara asked, not quite using the technical terminology that Sophie would have done. Echidna smiled again. Sophie was warming greatly to her. Any title that contained the word monster was massively misplaced in her opinion from the little time they had spent together so far. What she had seen told her that this was someone who cared for others, even those of different species, not someone who would cause damage and harm. "We have all combined magic and all worked together to achieve our greatness," Echidna summed up in a nutshell. "So this is what you were all capable of when you worked together?" Yasmin asked. "Yes," Echidna started. "There is no crime here. Everyone plays their part, all have a purpose, and all fulfill it." As Echidna finished her final sentence, she stopped walking and tapped her tail on the floor 3 times. The ground began to shake, and bits of stone started to crack and fall away from the floor. The girls all wobbled, but Kingsley and Echidna stayed perfectly still and relaxed. From beneath the ground came an enormous branch which scooped up all the people on the floor like a huge hand and started to raise them up into the invisible ceiling. It was clearly the skyscraper's lift. The girls wobbled slightly as it began its ascension, but quickly got used to it on the way up. "We have gnats that guard and control the environment. Hesperides provide us with sunlight, and cloud people that give us rain when we need it," Echidna explained, as the group were being whisked up into the sky at quite a fast pace. This, though, didn't stop her from explaining even more. "Duende help us to integrate newcomers. Flagga help us to see what might come, and Ganhava provide us with entertainment. Everything that you have been brought up to fear lives here with no quarrels or malice, I assure you." The journey upwards appeared to be slowing down, and eventually it stopped just to the side of a huge ledge which had another enormous wooden door on it. Echidna slithered off and beckoned the others to follow. Before she went to open the door, Echidna took hold of the handles and turned to look at her visitors. This is what we call the Overwatch. Echidna opened the doors and stepped back, allowing the girls and Kingsley to wander in. Kingsley was now as mind-blown as the girls at what was in front of him. Everything was made of the clearest glass and was almost completely see-through. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, even the huge table and chairs in the middle of the room were as good as transparent. Sophie figured that the only reason they weren't completely see-through was to allow people to know they were there, which in itself blew Sophie's brain. Once she had looked beyond the furniture, Sophie saw the view out of the enormous glass window. Stretching for miles in every direction, she could see that each of the zones that Meliora presided over stretched on for a lot further than she had originally thought. As far as the eye could see, there was snow in one direction, with immensely high mountain peaks way off in the distance. The jungle zone ran all the way for miles into the most gloriously tall and majestic waterfalls Sophie could ever imagine, and a desert zone which, as far as Sophie could tell, contains dunes, trees, and wildlife aplenty. The furthest thing away that she could see in that zone was a giant pyramid which almost touched the sky. The whole glass building that they were stood in emanated from beneath their feet and seemed to hover over the grassy epicentre they had stood in just a few minutes earlier. Sophie searched for the words, the questions, the exclamations, but nothing came out. The world was gorgeous, but humble, and all around was a sense of calm and tranquillity. It was Yasmin who spoke first. "How is this possible?" Echidna shut the doors, put her hands behind her back, smiled a proud smile, and slithered round the room with a look of self-satisfaction on her face. When we were banished, we had two choices. We could accept our fate and complain about it, or we could accept our fate and work together to make a world that we wanted. Sophie was listening, but still peering through the glass at the goings-on beneath her and above her as a flock of Pegasus flew by once more, much like they had done in Pinkleton a few days ago. These, however, almost brushed the window with their immense wings, and Sophie inadvertently went to duck, they got so close. "Please sit down," Echidna politely offered, pointing towards the transparent table and chairs. The girls didn't need asking twice. Their interests had been piqued, and they were all desperate to find out more. As a result, they all scurried over to the table and sat down on one of the glass chairs and listened to Echidna's story intently. As I said, on the day of our banishing by humanity, we creatures of different shapes, sizes, colours and backgrounds found ourselves all suffering together. Fortunately, we managed to muster up a shield to protect ourselves from it. If we ventured outside of that shield, our powers would go, and the pulse would make our ears bleed until we returned, but we still fought back against it and went to find more. Inside the shield, we realised that when we worked together, we could combine our abilities and create incredible things. We all serve a purpose here. Nobody is seen as useless, and nobody is ever left behind. Everyone contributes. Everyone reaps the rewards. We are the Myriad. "How has this not been found?" Sophie asked, finally finding a question to be asked, but straight away realising she already knew the answer to it. "We have creatures with the power to bend space. Once they learnt how to extend the shield, it was just a case of bending it the right way in order to fit into as small space as possible," Echidna replied. Clara looked baffled by that convoluted explanation, so Sophie stepped in to help. "They have squeezed a large space into a small space without humanity feeling any difference." Turning her nose up and nodding, Clara looked like someone does when they're faking being impressed because they don't understand. "Do you invite lots of people in from outside, even though it hurts to leave?" Yasmin asked. "We go out and find other creatures like us who have suffered and bring them here for a better life. Some creatures are more protected against the pulse than others. Those who are hard of hearing are more suited to this job, for example. Kingsley is a prime example of someone who we found. He was a changeling with no life. Had his powers shown before they did, we would have taken him years ago, but we had no clue." Echidna rested her hand on Kingsley's. He just nodded and accepted what he saw as an apology that he didn't think was warranted. "Would you take humans?" Yasmin asked. Echidna's kind smile faded slightly. "Only ones like you. You saved so many of us when you opened up Zatvor. Tell me, how many of these dangerous animals have done harm since they left there?" Sophie and the girls looked at each other. "None," she said sheepishly. It's like they haven't returned at all. Yet you humans don't even acknowledge our existence and pretend we were never part of the world. Who do you think are the actual monsters?" Sophie thought back to the things she had started to think were lies told by adults or situations that had been manipulated by them. The more she thought about it, the more examples of being lied to she could think of. Sophie saw the biggest lie of all, though, was the human silence and the denial of the mythical's existence. That was an insult to a group of creatures who had succeeded in bettering themselves, and humanity should be embarrassed by the state it found itself in. "We welcome you here because you helped us, and we have no quarrel with that. We want nothing to do with those who wronged us and those who would not acknowledge us or treat us fairly. Having you here is an honour, and during your time with us, you will find a lot of others who would like to thank you enormously," Echidna said, getting more determined and more emotional. Sophie could completely understand Echidna's point of view. Why should she help, take in, or give humanity even the slightest chance? She had been dismissed by them, and they wanted nothing to do with her. Just because she had helped create a paradise out of the horrific situation didn't mean that she should forgive being put in that situation in the first place. "What if they found you, or had reason to use you for their own gain?" Clara asked. In her eyes, she was being subtle, but Echidna saw through it and looked at her with a furrowed brow. "Why?" she asked Clara. "What's happening?" The girls all shuffled in their seats uncomfortably, and Sophie, factoring everything she had learnt about humans and mythicals in the last 7 weeks, and thus, without even questioning what she was doing, took it upon herself to explain to Echidna exactly what was happening with Alton King and humanity as a whole. The Sophie Hardy saga was written and produced by M.R. Dale and narrated and produced by Leona Hall. If you enjoyed it and would like to continue to follow the adventures of Sophie and her friends in coming episodes, then please subscribe through one of the many podcast providers out there. The links for each of these can be found on our website. If you require more information, visit our many social media channels, or if you would like to purchase a copy of the book, then be sure to check out our website, www.sophiehardysaga.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy.